Let's get something out of the way. We, on the left, have this revolting tendency that I want to steer clear of entirely for this sensitive and important topic. I am genuinely appalled, and frankly, I simply don't understand why some so-called leftists feel it's okay to make fun of landlords. It's unacceptable. Might I remind you that landlords live paycheck to paycheck? Your paycheck, sure, but still. And might I also remind you that rent in the US has gone up at a rate of 18% over the last 5 years alone, and almost 150% since 1985, completely outpacing inflation. Meaning every year that goes by is more money in landlords' pockets than the year before. And I'm sure you all know that more money means more problems. Tragic. Alright, let's talk about landlords for a minute. First things first, this video isn't about landlords as individuals. Landlords can be awful and landlords can be chill. There's truly every flavor of landlord out there. Not that I'm suggesting we should eat them, of course. No, this video is about landlords as a class, and the power that that class has. It's not a video about how individual landlords choose to use or not use that power, that's up to them, though most landlords absolutely abuse their privileged status. No, this video is a criticism of that power itself, how it underlies the landlord-tenant relationship, and the many awful consequences of landlords existing that we might want to reconsider. I'm not talking about individual people you might know that happen to be landlords, especially not any older relatives who rent out an extra property to supplement their retirement, for example. This video is about the existence of landlords in general. So, what's the problem with landlords? Generally speaking, landlording is a form of rent-seeking behavior. That's pretty obvious given the fact that the thing we give landlords is literally called rent. But let's actually go over what rent-seeking means for a second. Landlords, like all rent seekers, make money based not on any work they do, or in exchange for producing anything of value, but on the simple fact that they own something necessary. In this case, housing. They do not add anything to society, but they do accumulate wealth. Normally, accumulating wealth is something that's only supposed to happen when you produce wealth. Something that happens when people work. Taking thing A and, through varying processes, turning it into thing B, which is worth more, for example. That's what creates value in a society, and landlords just don't do that. While some landlords do a minimal amount of work, the big appeal of becoming a landlord is obviously the fact that it's quote-unquote passive income, meaning that it doesn't require any work from the landlord themselves. That's because at the end of the day, landlords are just the people who own the deed and nothing more. What the law considers livable requires very little effort to maintain once the developers, architects, and construction workers have already taken care of it. So either landlords will do very minimal labor or hire a property manager. In other words, a landlord doesn't actively produce anything for society, or at least they don't need to. You, in contrast, most likely do. In your role as a worker, you probably transform some raw material into something else, or you provide a service to someone, or you create something for others to use or enjoy, or you're currently pursuing some kind of education or training and will do one of those things soon. The important thing is that, without you, there would be no economy to speak of. Natural resources would stay in the ground, food wouldn't be food, people wouldn't get the services they need, and so on. Most likely, your boss pays you money for the work you do because it's produced something of value for at least one person, if not society writ large. But the same can't be said for landlords. Landlords don't produce anything. They don't design the buildings they own, that's architects. They don't plan or even finance their construction, that's developers and governments. They don't actually build the houses, that's construction workers. They don't handle the wiring, that's electricians. They don't fix your sink, that's the super or a handy worker of some sort. Landlords literally just own the house. That's it. Legally, that's all it takes for them to collect rent. Anything else they choose to do is extra credit. But landlords will tell you the opposite. To try to justify themselves and their parasitic role, landlords will often say something like, well, landlords provide housing. The idea being that this is some kind of service landlords are doing, and if we didn't have landlords, where would people get their homes? Where would they live? Where would they sleep? Where would they plug in their PS5s? Some other outlet? Don't be ridiculous. And this is an almost coherent argument, assuming you flat out ignore that the housing is there already. Other people did the work. It's done. In reality, landlords provide housing the same way scalpers provide tickets. They don't. Somebody already printed out the tickets, scheduled the show, booked the artists, hired the technicians, rented out the venue, and put the tickets on sale. Landlords are nothing more than a useless middleman, controlling more of the supply than they can use themselves, exactly like a scalper, in order to resell it and skim money off the top. A lot of money. On average, landlords in the US make $97K a year. In other words, more than double the average renter's income. That means that if you rent, your landlord, on average, makes twice as much as you and does literally nothing. This is particularly appalling given that there is no state, metropolitan area, or county in the US where a worker earning the federal or prevailing state or local minimum wage can afford a modest 2-bedroom rental. And in only 9% of all US counties can a full-time minimum wage worker afford a 1-bedroom rental. The amount landlords demand for rent to keep for themselves as they passively earn income is literally so high that even a person working a full-time job can't afford it. At best, landlords might claim that their added value to society is that they are facilitating the transmission of housing from the person who built it to the person who will eventually live in it. But even that isn't true. Not only is that almost labor, and that defeats the whole purpose of passive income, landlords make the process worse. If the landlord could buy the house in the first place, it's because it was already on sale somewhere, meaning that anyone could buy it themselves. Therefore, landlords interrupt the process of housing going from producer to user. They take a one-step process and complicate it. As part of this intrusion, they actively slow the process down and make it more expensive by outcompeting legitimate consumers, all thanks to their privileged financial means. Because landlords are privileged. And to see that, look no further than another thing landlords say. Oftentimes, you'll hear landlords tell people that if they don't like the landlord-tenant relationship, they can just leave, or buy their own home if that's what they prefer. It's so simple, just buy your own home if you're so upset. But it's obvious that's a BS argument, right? Buying a home is absurdly expensive, and landlords know this. While you can take out a mortgage to finance buying your home, you will still need to pay a down payment if you want to own a house. And that will need to come from your savings. You can't take a loan out for a down payment pretty much anywhere. That means only someone with enough in their savings can even consider homeownership as an option, meaning we've already filtered out millions of people from the just go buy your own house argument. Then there's the fact that a mortgage isn't even guaranteed. Banks will frequently deny people a $500 a month mortgage if they think they're too risky, blaming a low credit score. But of course, see no problem letting that same person continue paying $1,000 a month in rent. Most landlords know this too, and will take advantage of their good relationship with the bank thanks to their privileged financial status, to once again act as a middleman. Most of the time you're renting somewhere, your landlord is simply passing the cost of a mortgage off to you, the renter. They'll pay the down payment because they have enough savings and you don't, quickly make it back within a few months of renting the property out, and then cover the cost of a mortgage every month using your rent check. At the end of the day, you might have paid the full cost of the down payment and even the entirety of the mortgage, but they will own the house. You will leave with nothing and they will be left with an asset, effectively for free. And this might make it seem like since you're essentially able to afford it, you could theoretically save enough for a down payment and just own the house yourself. But of course, that's an almost impossibly difficult thing to do when 30+% of your paycheck already goes towards paying for housing every month, because you're forced to be a renter. Only those born into wealth can skip the renting phase and go straight to the homeownership phase, since everyone else needs to rent while they work and save up enough for the down payment. So really, the go buy your own house argument also doesn't apply to most people under 30. Then on top of all this, there's the landlords who don't use this clever passing the buck trick with their mortgages, and whose rent checks are pure profit. Just as an example, 45% of landlords in the UK have no outstanding mortgages whatsoever. Every cent you send their way goes directly in their pockets. They have the asset, and simply because of that fact and nothing more, they collect the money. So if you can't afford to buy your own home, after all, millennials have 35% less wealth than previous generations at the same age, a singularly high mountain of student loan debt, suffer from the fact that housing prices have been on an upward trajectory their entire adult lives, and around 70% say that they are waiting to buy a home because they simply can't afford it. What are you supposed to do? Well, if you don't like renting because it's exploitative and rent-seeking, and you can't afford your own place because staggeringly few people can, the only option left is homelessness. And homelessness, apart from being one of the most brutal, crushing situations a human being can experience, also happens to be pretty much illegal all over the country. Everywhere in the United States, cities erect anti-homeless architecture to drive the homeless out and make their mere existence miserable. It's illegal in many places to pitch a tent or even just sleep. And cops will happily enforce these laws, or enforce the anti-homeless law they imagine must exist even when it doesn't. Cops frequently destroy homeless camps, beat the homeless, or otherwise make their existence hell. And once again, landlords know this is the alternative. And they know that if you complain, they can always call the sheriff and have you evicted, violently pushing you out of your home and closer to the terrifying possibility of becoming homeless. Landlords are not shy when it comes to using this pressure. Officially, 3.6 million eviction notices are filed each year. And that's just the official evictions, not including all the evictions millions of people are forced into when landlords suddenly jack up rents and you're forced to look elsewhere. The result is that in any given year, 3.5 million people, 1.4 million of them children, experience homelessness. What all this means is that every lease you've ever had has been signed under duress. While you technically have the freedom to choose what landlord you sign a lease with, most people do not have the freedom to not sign a lease at all. The only other reasonable option, homeownership, is unaffordable, and it's either that or you're on your own, with your most basic human need going unmet. That means renting isn't just a normal transaction, it's ransom. Everyone knows that housing is a good investment. It's the #1 piece of financial advice that's consistent from year to year, and housing is probably the best thing you can put your money in if you have it. The reason that's true is that the demand for housing is inelastic at the individual level. We all need to be housed. It is a non-negotiable condition of living. That means that those who control the supply, landlords, can create artificial scarcity to jack up the prices. Since when push comes to shove, you will pay however much you can afford on meeting your most fundamental needs. Same with food, same with healthcare. With the added fact that the price has no relationship whatsoever to the value added to society. So far, all these have been generic problems with landlords. But then there are all of the specific consequences of this system. For starters, in the US, a lot of the housing supply is not held by individuals, but by investment firms. Further proof that it's not work that makes landlords money, by the way, it's literally just the ownership of assets. Hundreds of thousands of Americans, whether they know it or not, are renting from Wall Street. For-profit firms, as opposed to individual investors, control around 45% of the housing supply, or 21.7 million individual units according to Pew. As a for-profit venture, housing owned in this arrangement usually comes with even worse conditions than a quote-unquote normal landlord-tenant relationship. Renting from Wall Street comes with aggressive rent hikes, fee gouging, and high rates of eviction. This is because investors have found that, although tenant turnover costs companies an average of $1,500, they can easily recover that cost through late fees, court fines, or retaining tenant security deposits. And since shareholders demand that profits consistently outpace inflation, that cost gets passed on to renters. In other words, you. This means for-profit firms will make sure to make a profit by any means necessary, regardless of how many evictions it takes. These companies will use every violent tool available to make a profit, and we have no choice but to agree to these awful terms because we can't not have housing. The perpetrators of these acts are companies like Blackstone, the world's largest real estate management firm, which should obviously not be confused with BlackRock, the mega firm that also invests a ton into housing, $120 billion by their own admission, and which has multiple former high-level employees in the Biden admin. Nor should it be confused with Blackwater, the private security company hired by the US government that guarded the homes of the wealthy during Hurricane Katrina, and was given the license to shoot people simply trying to flee one of the greatest disasters in American history. 3 very different, totally normal companies that should absolutely not be mixed up. But back to landlording. Large, for-profit housing firms use their powerful financial position to do all sorts of cruel things. Like the stuff we've already covered, but also like stopping rent control laws that would prevent them from hiking up rents willy-nilly. In practical terms, that means using the profits made from tenants to screw tenants over even more in the future. Then there's the fact that the two sides of Wall Street are mutually beneficial. while one side exploits the nature of the market to make profits, eventually crashing the economy like what's happened every 5 or 10 years for the last half-century. The other side buys up the houses that get foreclosed on. We saw this in 2008. The economy crashed due to Wall Street chasing big bucks, millions of people were foreclosed on, and Wall Street firms, still flush with cash, bought up all that housing. According to The Intercept, quoting Julia Gordon of the NCST, the addition of 7 million single-family rental homes since 2005 has almost a 1-to-1 relationship with the number of families who lost their homes to foreclosure. I mean, for God's sake, even the guy who thought the invisible hand of the market could fix everything hated landlords. Here in the US, landlords make up a measly 6.7% of the total population, but a whopping 238 federal lawmakers are landlords. Our political system is built in such a way that landlording, for all its exploitation and worthlessness to the rest of us, will endure because it moves money up towards the wealthy. That is the sad reality we live in today, but it doesn't have to be. Affordable or even free housing is not only feasible, it's the norm in plenty of places around the world. When you take profiteering out of the equation, you free up funds that can go into making public housing amazing and available to all. The way socialists in Vienna, for example, have created public housing that not only looks great, but fully houses 62% of the city. If all landlords do is orchestrate the process of a home going to someone who needs it, but do so while skimming huge profits off the top, never reinvesting that money into making the property better, and keeping out millions of people who desperately need it, it's not hard to imagine a city or national government being able to do the same thing better, without all the awful rent seeking. Millions of homes are vacant. Free or at least affordable housing, provided with the goal of safely housing the population, not for the passive profits of those who hold housing for ransom, can be our reality. It doesn't have to be just a dream. All we have to do is cut out the middleman. If you've watched my videos for a while, you're probably aware that YouTube doesn't treat socialist creators very well. I've had countless videos demonetized, age restricted, even completely hidden from search results and put behind multiple warning messages. I have to be very careful with how I make my videos so that YouTube doesn't get angry with me. Stuff like this is why some of my creator friends and I teamed up to build Nebula, a streaming platform where we can make the videos we want to make, where we can experiment without being punished by the algorithm, and where we can post content that just wouldn't be allowed on YouTube. Nebula is home to a growing list of some of the best creators, many of whom I'm lucky enough to call personal friends. And we're really excited to be able to offer our viewers a place where they can see the content that we really want to make. From longer cuts of our YouTube videos, to our new Nebula classes, to original series like The New F Word, my documentary series on the history and resurgence of fascism. Episode 2 is coming October 6th, by the way. The best part is, when you use one of our sign-up links, all this content is just $3 a month, or $30 a year. That's like 1 coffee a month. So if you'd like to help support your favorite independent creators, and get access to ad-free content you won't find anywhere else, sign up for Nebula at the link below. It really does help support my channel and educational creators all across YouTube. If you enjoyed this video, consider dropping a like. If you hated it, a thumbs down. You can check out my previous videos by clicking the links on your screen. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.